Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We were experiencing a couple of technical difficulties, but now we're all set to go. So my name is Imran Chowdhury, and you are at the 2021 edition of Social Sciences for the Real World, which is an initiative that was started a few years ago at SASE, which brings together practitioners and academics to talk about issues of contemporary interest. And this year, our topic is about time, the commodification of time, labor, and well-being in the modern economy. So we're really excited to have just an excellent set of panelists with us today. We have expertise from the domains of sociology, business and management, and emergency medicine to bring to you today. And we're going to, I think, have a really exciting dialogue with all of you. So what I thought I'd do is start with a brief introduction of the panelists. I'll do less than a minute each. We will then go and give the panelists 5 minutes to have an opening statement, whatever they would like to say about their area of expertise and with respect to the topic today. And then we'll do a short kind of structured question and answer, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So again, very excited to be here with you. And I also, excuse me, and before we get started on the introductions, I also wanted to introduce one of the other co-organizers who you see on the screen. The other two are here, but somehow they got into the attendees list, and Gerhard Schnyder. So Gerhard, if you would say hello for a second.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us in this slightly different format than it normally is, but it's great to have a good turnout here. And thanks also from me to our panelists for accepting to be here tonight. Really excited about it. So I'll stop talking and let the panelists do the talking now. Thanks.
Thanks, Gerhard. So I'll start again with a brief introduction, first with Sonya Stokes. So Dr. Sonya Stokes is an assistant professor of assistant clinical professor at the Mount Sinai Icahn School of Public Health in the Division of Emergency Medicine and Global Health. She's also a biosecurity fellow at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and she's a practicing emergency medicine physician. During the initial phase of COVID-19 in New York City, she was part of the frontline response, treating patients in the emergency department, and she served on Mount Sinai's COVID-19 Best Practice Committee and is a member of the independent task force on preparing for the next pandemic at the Council on Foreign Relations. She's an extremely distinguished person, has a medical degree from University of California, Davis School of Medicine, and completed her fellowship training in international emergency medicine at the Columbia University Medical Center, where she also earned a Master of Public Health in the program on forced migration and humanitarian assistance. So welcome, Sonya. Second, Brad Ayon is a recent graduate of the PhD program at the John Molson School of Business at Concordia University in Montreal. He also recently started a faculty position, congratulations, at the University of Québec at Montreal in the business and management area. He's an expert on time management, has a super interesting philosophical approach to the subject. I recommend his TED Talk to you all. It's I think underviewed at about 400,000 views, but really excellent. And finally, last but not least, is Ryan Hagen, who's a postdoctoral research fellow at Columbia University. Ryan is an expert on time and disaster management. He's co-director of the New York COVID-19 Oral History, Narrative, and Memory Archive, which is a National Science Foundation funded longitudinal study of the pandemic in New York. He also started a newsletter around COVID-19 last March, I think on March 14th, 2020, which has been timely and super interesting. His dissertation and current book project is a study of disaster risk management, and it's also about time and temporality, specifically how institutions increasingly try to preserve the present against future disruption. So again, we're really excited to have this great panel with us today, and we'll move now to the opening statement. So I thought we'd start with Brad. Please go ahead.
Hey, thanks a lot for the very warm introduction. I really appreciate it. So there's three things I wanted to say. The first one is that so my research is on time management, but I'm not a fan of time management. In fact, I'm working on a book that's titled Against Time Management. So I guess that really tells you, my stance on this topic. My issue with it is that time management is more and more associated with productivity and efficiency, rather than just using your time in a meaningful and healthy way. And so one of the topics of my research is on how we're more and more responsible for managing our own time. It's an individual responsibility, and now we take it for granted. But just 50 years ago, much of our time was managed for us by society. Monday used to be laundry day. You didn't do the laundry at any point in time. You do it on Monday because that's a social norm. You wake up on Sunday, you don't have to decide between working or going to brunch or watching Netflix. The only option usually, if you were a Christian, was to go to church. So in a sense, society was managing your time for you, and it made time management easier in the sense that you don't have to constantly think about what to do and at what time. And because time management has become so individualistic, we overemphasize the responsibility of the individual to manage his or her time at the expense of how public policies can help. So for instance, in Sweden, people have on average 9 extra hours of leisure time a week compared to France, and that's explained solely by a difference in social public policies. The other thing that I study is how productivity practices, the ones that we use in our day-to-day lives, are becoming more and more extreme, even though we don't notice it. When I started my PhD, I told my supervisor, Alex Panaccio, about this new thing at the time where people were listening to audiobooks and podcasts at twice the regular speed. And she said, "No, what the hell, who does that? It's just, like weird people." And guess what? 7 years later, it's, she does it, everyone's doing it. And when I told her just 2 years ago that this is going to happen to TVs and TV shows and movies as well, she's like, "There's no way in hell that's going to happen." And guess what? Just 3 days ago, I saw that Netflix has that feature where you can watch TV shows and movies at twice the speed. And now it's become normalized. So it's these things that seem very extreme at first that become more and more normalized because we have this incentive to be more and more productive. That's it. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm just going to let other people speak.
Thank you, Brad, and we want to hear you speak. So thank you, and we'll come back to you during the Q&A. Sonya, if you would go next, please.
Thank you all for having me join you today. So a little bit more about my background in public health, because previously I focused mostly on resource-limited settings in areas of armed conflict like Afghanistan and Eastern Congo, and little did I know how useful these skills would end up being when practicing in New York City, where I'm an emergency physician, and I am also part of Mount Sinai Health Partners Advisory Committee. COVID-19 created seismic shifts that have revealed deep foundational flaws, not just in healthcare, but in nearly all social support structures. And so my primary goal when I joined the advisory team was to provide assistance to companies and organizations that were engaging in hardcore public health work to protect their workforce during the pandemic. It has truly amazed me to see private businesses stepping up to fill in gaps where we within the medical community have faltered. I mean, to be more frank, we have failed you. And so when companies are doing this really important work, I think it's important for us to help. And initially, most of this was restricted to safe return to office protocols, testing strategies, guidance for masking and physical distancing, and other infection control measures for workplaces, for businesses, so that they could make sure that people who were already in the office and people who were coming back would know that they were safe. But what has surprised me is witnessing this evolution over the past 3 months to include psychosocial measures as well into the process. Businesses are realizing that mental health is a critical aspect of workforce wellness, and they are addressing the heavy burden of anxiety and depression exacerbated by the pandemic. And I say exacerbated because, again, while some things may have been created, some things were definitely already there and underlying already pretty big issues that we have just within the workforce as also within our general society. And so many of our companies that we advise are utilizing us to provide necessary information and resources to help their workforce. Many are even going a step further by listening to their workforce, asking them what they need to feel secure, to come back to work, and then taking steps to meet those needs. A lot of that has to do exactly what my fellow panelists just mentioned, is time management strategies that their own employers can help with their employees. So that can be protected time, that can be assistance with getting childcare. These are things that are crucial because when it comes to businesses, they're realizing it's not just about being safe, but also feeling safe. These are both incredibly important. They are what actually translate to security and trust that are essential to workforce wellness. And this is something that has been chronically overlooked well before the pandemic. And I have to say, that is especially most pronounced even within healthcare. In my own field, we may be the worst when it comes to protecting well-being in the workforce. And you see this because during the pandemic, we have had pretty extensive shortages for the most part across all fields in medicine. And this has only worsened over time. And in some ways, you see some solutions being addressed by trying to take on the mental health aspects of this, but really at the core issue, it's about workforce safety, and it's about these other aspects of creating a secure workplace, the time management aspect. What can you do to help when you have shortages? How can you help people so that they can take on the burden of their workload and do it not just well, but also so that they feel well about the work that they're doing? And I'll stop there.
Ryan.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So I'll start kind of from the abstract and move a little bit more specifically into my research. I'd like us to think just a little bit about what we really mean when we say things like time is money or time is being commodified, because time is a very strange sort of commodity. It's not at all like lithium batteries or lumber or any of the things we think of as commodities, because you can't make more of it. You can't ship it around from one place to another or stockpile it in a warehouse. And you can't substitute one moment for another, because every moment in time is different in some way. And so if time is a commodity, it's like money, one of the things that Karl Polanyi called a fictitious commodity. It is inextricably embedded in human social activity. And when you try to commoditize it and subject it to market pressures, you create all kinds of social distortions, hardships, and alienations. So another way that time is like money is that it's not so much a physical object as it is a medium through which other things pass. So money is a medium through which we can exchange in the market, and time is a medium through which we coordinate activity with other people. So it's a medium also through which power and control can be transmitted, which is super important. So we can understand time as a social and relational thing rather than as a property of individuals, as Brad was saying before. Its value and its utility and the level of quality that we assign to time depends on this relationality, on the number and social location of people that we can use it to coordinate with. and for how long we can share our focus together. And when we feel time pressure, it's often the feeling of other people's expectations or the obligations that are upon us and the deadlines and working hours that are imposed on us by powerful institutions. So the COVID-19 pandemic has been a catastrophe of time. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So in my research, my colleagues and I have been studying the experience of the pandemic in New York City through surveys, interviews, and written diary entries. And in these surveys, one of the things that we do is administer an acute stress response questionnaire. And the most widely and intensely experienced stress symptom in these questionnaires has been a sense of timelessness, a sense of timelessness. So people in stressful situations oftentimes will report feeling distortions in the way that they experience the passage of time. But we wonder if this sense of timelessness is as much a cause as it is an effect of the stress of the pandemic. And these interviews give us a deeper look at why that might be the case and why people report feeling this sense of timelessness. And it is because of the profound disruptions that the pandemic has caused in the rhythms of our social lives that have been imposed by fear of contagion, but also because of the restrictions on social life that have been put in place to fight the pandemic. And these disruptions happen across 3 different scales of time. So on the most immediate level, the day-to-day experience of getting tasks done, working and eating and being with others. At the intermediate level of weeks and months, this is the realm of the projects that we undertake. And it also disrupts people's sense of the long timelines or temporal horizons and landscapes where we plot our careers and our life courses and where we think about the future of our societies and our place within them. So in the interviews that we've done with people, in people's daily experience, their schedules were fundamentally changed and turned liquid in some ways. Their commutes vanished or were unpredictable because of erratic service on public transportation. Errands, both trivial and crucial, took on an unpredictable amount of time to complete because of the precautions around getting sick or not. Because social venues and social gatherings were locked down because of pandemic restrictions, there were fewer ways for people to distinguish between weekdays and weekends, and even between working hours and leisure time. Parents were at home with their children and found their schedules completely upended by the collapse of childcare. At an intermediate level, there was a deep confusion for people around how long the lockdowns would last, especially early on. Would it be a couple of weeks, a couple of months? When would people be able to return to work? When would things return to normal? And how long would projects take under these new difficult working conditions? And the pandemic also wrought changes to the temporal landscape. And these were small at first, but they grew and gathered over time. So annual holidays, milestone birthdays, and life course markers like weddings and funerals and graduations were canceled or postponed. People worried about how the pandemic might derail their careers or destroy their industries. People's ideas changed about what kind of futures were even possible in a country that mishandled the pandemic as badly as the US did. And of course, there was inequality in how these disruptions were experienced. And we should think about this still as we do start to reemerge from lockdown and start to reemerge into economic activity. What kinds of people are given the privilege of planning for and being able to envision their futures? What sorts of people are able to retain discretion over how and with whom they spend their time as they return into the workplace? And who ultimately is given the authority to declare the pandemic over, even while people still suffer from it? So in closing, I'll just emphasize again that time isn't just a resource or a commodity. It's a relational socio-material practice. It's a medium through which we coordinate with each other and with institutions, not a property of individuals. And to kind of demonstrate that case, I'll stop talking now to stop going over my 5 minutes and stealing time from the rest of all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you to all the panelists. So before we move on, we now have two of the other 2 organizers here. They were able to join us on this side of the screen. So I would just like to give them time to introduce themselves. So Anna Skarpelis, Dr. Skarpelis, just completed a postdoc at the Weatherhead Institute at Harvard, and now I think you're in Basel, right? You're a research fellow at the University of Basel. So Anna, please.
Oh, I think that was a perfect introduction. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And we have Professor Isabel Ferreras, who is, I guess this year, Isabel, you're the head of the Royal Academy of Sciences, yes, in Belgium. And she is, in addition, a tenured fellow of the Belgian National Science Foundation and a professor at the University of Leuven. But Isabel, please, if you would like to say.
I'm so glad to hear from you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about time. And I'm not going to take more time.
All right, thank you. So thank you again, Anna and Isabel. So before we move on, just to let everyone in the audience know how kind of we can do interaction. Mostly this is unfortunately one way. We're speaking almost at you, but you will see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. You can click the Q&A button, write your questions as we're speaking when they come to you. And what I thought we'd do is, I have a structured set of questions and I can do as many of those as needed, but I'd rather take more questions from the audience and have kind of organic discussion amongst the panelists and even the organizers if they want to intervene. So again, I urge you to pose those questions as they come to mind, and I will be constantly checking them to make sure that we address as many of them as we can. Okay, so I will take the moderator privilege of the first couple of questions, and I just in order to do this, I want to give you a little bit of a background of how we came up with this year's topic. You know, because this is the third year we've been doing social sciences for the real world, and somehow we were on a call during the holidays. I think it was like late December, and we got to discussing one of the fathers of modern management, who is Frederick Winslow Taylor, right? In some ways, the father of the management. And we basically were discussing, well, was Taylor a charlatan, right? Was he a charlatan? He's considered by many people to be the first kind of management consultant, the first person who kind of systematized these time and motion studies, right, where you would increase the efficiency of people, let's say, shoveling dirt or things like that. But in some ways, there's also dehumanization, right, of work, right, and that kind of ushered in this era of modern management, but also brought with it a lot of pathologies, right, in the modern workplace, which exist to this day. So with that in mind, we thought, okay, let's think about time across different social domains, and especially in this era, health, as a general concept, but again, in the way it impinges on our lives and different aspects of our lives. So that's kind of the origin. And with that in mind, you know, I reviewed the work of all of the panelists, and so if you would indulge me, I'd like to have a few targeted questions which everyone should answer, but maybe the panelist I'm addressing with the specific questions would go first. So Ryan, I saw this really interesting op-ed you wrote for the Washington Post a few years ago called "Daylight Saving Time is Just One Way Standardized Time Zones Oppress You." That was great. Great title, great op-ed, which I suggest you all take a look at. And there's a lot in there, but I just want to hone in on something that you wrote. So you write at a certain point, with the Industrial Revolution, clock time liberated the workday from solar time and established labor routines organized by schedules, the 9-to-5 job being the ultimate expression of this. In the 21st century, work has escaped the bounds of the 9-to-5 schedule, organized instead around what media scholar Robert Hassan calls network time. Under network time, we're expected to do our jobs whenever the task demands it, no matter what our local time is. And I guess what I'd like you to do, Ryan, is talk about this concept of network time and maybe how it's expressed in the work that you've done. And then I'd like the other two panelists also to comment on it with respect to their own work.
So it's fascinating. That op-ed is from a couple of years ago, and I think that it's even more the case now that work is escaping the bounds of the workday for people because of this constant connectedness that the internet allows for people. But also, the idea of network time is also that the demands of work don't just slip the bounds of the workday or the time zone, but they can spread globally. So, for example, there are firms that maintain teams across time zones so that they can optimize work in different parts of the globe. So I had a friend, for example, who worked for a US media company who worked out of the London bureau to do early morning shifts in New York, basically, right? So to allow a daytime staff to work for early morning hours in a different time zone. And this is a way in which firms and individuals can operate 24 hours a day around the globe as the sun shifts, right? And there's productivity gains to that, but there's also a sort of tyranny because it allows you to be on call for work at any given moment. And it allows people to have their personal time invaded by the demands of work and obligations of work. And I think this is something that happened especially under the pandemic as the workday dissolved under the lockdown conditions and people were working from home. There was a complaint that people were working far longer hours in order to get less work done because of the demands of shifting the work of coordinating with each other and doing the job that needed to be done that could have been done in an office before, but now is being kind of slipped across the entire day. So the idea that you can work from home and not have any, boundaries around your personal time or personal space is something that it was certainly accelerated by the pandemic.
Thank you, Ryan. Sonya, would you like to speak to that issue? I guess as an emergency room physician, time is already a strange concept for you, right? As a practicing emergency room physician, how would you react to that idea, this idea of network time?
Well, I would react to that by saying that you sort of defined what my practice is, my specialty. We have a saying, it's 24/7, 365, and sometimes every 4 years, 366. I mean, that's the care that emergency physician provides. It's interesting because as I mentioned with the advisory capacity work I do see this as an issue that comes up for the workplace, but it does not easily translate to mine itself. So while I can view it as this is a valuable topic of discussion for certain disciplines, for myself, and as and this may actually have more to do with some of the other elements that we experience within healthcare, specifically burnout, right? Is that because time isn't really an element that we can control. It's just how we sort of share the burden of work is really the only sort of mechanism that we have at our disposal. So for us, what we have as opposed to this idea of network time, we have how do we come up with conventional contingency and crisis standards of care, right? How do we share the workload? How does that actually translate to better workplace conditions for us and also better care, less mistakes, better outcomes for our patients? So that's more or less my response to that. And even though I think there's probably some element of time that influences it, I think that is in its way what makes it a bit separate. But it is a huge component, I think, that other people should also continue to look at this lens is when we're talking about this idea of what we want our workplaces to look like in the future and how we're going to actually make our work lives actually be a part of living and not just all the time working. I think both are important to have as part of the discussion.
Thank you, Sonia. And I'm going to come back to you maybe
Mhm.
later on in the discussion on how that, as a
Mhm.
frontline worker, how that kind of intersected with your sense of reality and time, right, during this
Gosh.
during this pandemic. Thank you.
I mean, also, I might just query my other panelists to, I'm happy if you want to give me work-life advice live over the panel, you can do that as well. And I will happily share it to the rest of my colleagues in emergency medicine. We will welcome any and all advice you can give.
Oh, but this is great because that's a great segue to Brad, who actually has made this the basis of his academic career, his practice, his advice giving function. So Brad, how would you react to this?
Thanks. I think this whole network time thing is particularly damaging. I think as we've all seen, a lot of people are working a lot more. I think the average is 2 to 3 extra hours a day, at least in the United States. Most of that time has been reallocated from commuting because people don't commute when they work from home, and so most of that time has been reallocated either to their main job or to a side job that they've started. And it's I think it's terrible because again, this is one of those things where back 20, 30, 40 years ago, we had a physical boundary between work and non-work, which was the office. When you leave the office, usually work is done. You can get a late night call, but usually you don't work from home. But now you do most of your work from home, so it's up to you, again, the individual, to establish those boundaries. So it's an extra task that's added on you to regulate yourself, have a strict routine, strict schedule, establish your own boundaries. And sometimes even if you do establish those boundaries, you're expected to be on call all the time. If you get an email Saturday at 3 in the morning, you're going to feel bad for not being that employee is not as committed as the person who sent you an email at 3 in the morning. I think it's just it just pits the individual against very, very strong social norms, and between work and non-work, work tends to win the time race. So that's what I had to say.
Great, thank you. I have questions, but I'm going to actually take. We already have a couple of questions that have come in the chat and the Q&A, so I'm going to take the first of those. So this is from Karen Shire, who writes, in Europe, we had a huge divide in the workforce between those men, she puts in parentheses, in core industries who were allowed to work short time with state subsidies, and essential workers in supermarkets, retail, and health services who work extreme overtime. Hasn't the COVID crisis amplified the differences between the relative regulation of working time and skilled industrial work and the situation in most of the health and social services, also very skilled, but without the same protections? I will let Sonya, who is in one of those fields, address that initially.
Thank you for that question. And, it's one that's close to my heart because I think that you see what happens, at least within my own field, is that you're just seeing one aspect of the culture of medicine, which relies heavily on this idea of heroism, that and then the other side of that, which is this aspect of suppressing issues that come up with related to burnout, right? Throughout the pandemic, it's just been this tension that's always there, where I think now we're starting to realize more and more there needs to be a transition from heroism towards humanism. We talked about a lot in sort of earlier similar formats where we've had conversations about how to address this issue of burnout and workforce retention in healthcare. And I think that making it about human-centered care is a huge step in that right direction. And ultimately, though, we have to get out of crisis mode before we can even, I think, fully address this. There are real workforce shortages that have been there for a while, and they're not going away anytime soon. So it's this vicious cycle that you get in if you don't try to make changes now and also for the future. It will just continue. And and really being a part of that within healthcare to actually start changing our culture. And by that, I say making standards is our sort of way forward, because unless you have standards, I think when Brad, you mentioned boundaries, that's not just a function of time. I mean, you need to make those actually hard, fast rules, for us at least, because yeah, work doesn't end when the shift ends. It can keep going on and on. So until you have actual standards, numbers of workforce that are required, hours that need to be protected, and then that's actually how you get change.
Thank you, Sonia. Brad or Ryan?
Ryan, do you want to go first?
No, I'm happy to let you go first.
Thanks. So thanks a lot for this question. One thing that I noticed is that I don't know if this is particular to Europe. What I know about Canada and the United States is that retail workers, supermarket workers, coffee shop, restaurants, those workers suffer sometimes from overtime, but mostly from irregular work hours. So they can be called on a very, very short notice. Sometimes, they can call you same day. Sometimes you don't know exactly when you're going to be at work and when you're not going to be working. And so it's very hard to have a regular schedule. And the impact of that non-regular schedule has a much, much more negative impact on your well-being and mental health than those low salaries, because usually those jobs don't pay much in the first place. But the impact of schedule irregularity on mental health is even worse. It's a lot worse than not having enough money. So usually what happens is that they can't make plans with their family. They don't know exactly when they're going to be able to pick up their kids from school. They can't make plans to socialize with other people because they don't know what their schedule is going to look like on a day-to-day basis. And that creates a lot of instability, a lot of sleep problems as well. So all these problems compound and they have a huge effect on their health and family life. What also happened what's been happening for the past 60 years or so is a polarization in terms of work hours, where people that are in these kind of jobs are underemployed. So they work less than they would like to. Whereas people that are in, I guess, more skilled work, they work insane hours. They work a lot. So there's been a shift over the past, compared to like the early 20th century, where poor people work a lot and rich people don't work with the aristocracy. Today, it's the opposite. Rich people tend to work a lot and poor people don't work as much as they would like to. So there's been that kind of polarization in work hours. So that's all I wanted to add.
I would just say, kind of going off of what Brad was saying, is that's what I meant a little bit by time is a medium through which power gets transferred. Because while your employer can reach you at all hours, it's not as if that accessibility goes both ways. It's not as if your employer is more responsive to you after hours to your needs, right? So, and again, one of this inability of people to schedule their lives around a fluid work schedule or an unpredictable work schedule also impacts the course of the pandemic, because of, again, in the US at least, one of the reasons that people give for hesitating to get vaccinated is that they're worried about side effects of the vaccine preventing them from fulfilling their work obligations, that they won't be able to take 2 or 3 days off. Their employer will fire them, or they work on demand. And so missing 2 or 3 days produces an intolerable or unsustainable impact to their income. And so again, this is a way in which, inequalities that well predated the pandemic get exacerbated by the pandemic, and then also perpetuate the pandemic because we can't get enough people vaccinated because of their economic precarity. So, yeah.
For that. And if I may, I'm going to ask Isabel to weigh in, because Isabel, as many of you may know, is the leader, along with a couple of other colleagues, of this initiative that was started called Democratizing Work. It started basically, I think, in the wake of the pandemic. So I don't know if Isabel, if you would have any thoughts on this issue.
Sure. Thank you, Imran. Yeah, I think I'm fascinated fascinated by what you are sharing, and indeed, I think the ability to have an impact on one's own schedule is really probably among the most relevant political rights that should be guaranteed to people in their work life. We can indeed see, workers are really governed by the rules of the workplace, and all their capacity to indeed to combine, with their responsibilities as parents, to even get access to another training, all of that depends on being able to manage their own schedule. And obviously there is a collective dimension to scheduling, because we are in service-based economies where the coordination is key. And so it's even more relevant to think of this as a governmental issue at the workplace level. And it's indeed very, it speaks volume for how workers are actually considered, not citizens in the workplace. They don't have access to the government of their own life and their collective life. And I think that's a big problem, obviously, because it's contradicts entirely the creed of our democratic societies. So we have to worry about that, to be worried about that. And obviously, like, labor rights are going after this capacity, but it's not enough. We certainly see in the US that even with the best, organizing drive possible, like if you think about what happened at the Amazon, plant in Bessemer, Alabama, it failed, obviously, because Amazon is so powerful that it really frightened workers. But it should be part of the rights, obviously, of any citizen to be able to be citizens in the workplace, and so to wait on the government of the firms in which they are working. I'll stop.
No, that's great. No, thank you as well. Brad, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Isabel said. It really is about rights. I was reading this book by, I think her name was Julie Rose, Time as Freedom. It's really about liberty. So in philosophy, in some disciplines, there's two kinds of freedoms. There's negative liberty and positive liberty. Positive liberty is, being free to do whatever you want, and negative liberty is being free from things that prevent you from getting where you want to be. And so time is often about negative liberty, because when you're poor, as Ryan said, when you have an unpredictable schedule, you are not, it really prevents you from having a stable life. It prevents you from doing all kinds of things. One recent time use study that came out just 2 months ago was about how if you are in the lowest SES categories in the United States, you have to wait more. You have to spend a lot more time waiting for things because you are poorer. And so very often you have to apply for welfare services, which means you have to wait in line. Sometimes you have to leave work to go to a governmental agency and wait again. So a lot of your time is taken away from you. And so there's obviously a deep connection with individual freedoms and liberties there when it comes to time.
Right. So just before we move on, I see that there's a hand raised in the chat. So David Schwartz. So David and others, I can't unmute anyone because we are in a webinar format. So if you want to ask a question, what I would say is please ask it in the Q&A. And then I will get to the question like that. And there's a question in the chat as well that I'm gonna address. And I have a hand from Anna. So Anna, would you like to weigh in?
Hi, sure. I don't know how that happened. But all the panelists have spoken to questions of power, and I'm also seeing Daniel's question that I'm just going to shamelessly pull into my own, because it's very similar along the lines of what I'm thinking. And his question is about political initiatives that seek to increase workers' temporal autonomy anywhere in the world. What's the key to their success? And I would like to add to that question and ask you to reflect on what power means for those who tend to have less of it. So Brad, you kind of started your 5-minute pitch by saying laundry day used to be on Mondays, and there was some kind of beauty and simplicity in that regularity. So it's not so it seems that control over when you do things doesn't necessarily need to be crucial for autonomy, right? So my question would be, what is it about time that makes it different from other commodities? And Ryan, you were talking about this as well, right? Sonya, in your work, if somebody comes in sick into an emergency room and doesn't receive the care because there's nobody there, they're going to die, or fare very poorly. In other types of jobs, it looks very different. Nobody is going to die if we don't send our review off, an R&R, and on a Tuesday. If we send it in on Wednesday, it's going to be fine. No hearts will stop beating. So my question really is, what is it about time that makes it so crucial? Is it about a lack of control and self-determination? Is it about too much time being taken? And what are the resources, going back to Daniel's question, and also in some ways Karen Schreiber's question, what are the resources and sites of power and resistance that those whose time is being deployed for them can take?
That's such a fascinating question. And I think I can start to try to answer that. And one of the reasons that time is different, and one way that we can think about time and power, particularly for people who don't have a lot of it, is that the ability to coordinate a lot of people's effort and attention around an issue produces or allows the exercise of political power. One of the things that came up a lot in our research of the pandemic in New York City is the ways in which the pandemic helped to fuel political action and protest activity in the city for people who otherwise might not have been paying attention to protests, might not have had the time because they were at work, might have been rather spending their time out doing social activities or otherwise not paying attention. But their focus was drawn to the movement for Black Lives for many reasons, one of which is that it was a way for them to feel as if to engage in a project to improve the world around them in a time where nothing else was going on because everything was locked down. And so the ability to coordinate people's schedules, that you're able to get people together for mass protests, that you're able to get people to pay attention to things at the same time, even if it's not minute to minute, but days and weeks. That is a really important way in which time and the ability to coordinate schedules and people's activity can be a source and a way in which political power can be exercised.
Sonya, would you like to speak to that kind of? And not to pick on you, but just to say that I've been on several events at several events where Sonya has spoken, and she's really played a big role in organizing emergency room physicians and other workers in the context of this post-COVID environment. So I don't know if you'd be willing to share that work with the audience here.
Sure. Although I hope I'm going to actually answer Anna's question. So please, Anna, at any time, step in and make sure that I'm on track, because it is just such a different way to hear this discussion framed. It is definitely not my world. We are very operational focused in emergency medicine, and even more so during the pandemic. But I think a way to answer this is to highlight something that preceded the pandemic that I'm sure nobody here is aware of, but will probably scare you the next time you go into the hospital, and hopefully that's never. But there's something called the 4-hour rule that was implemented in emergency medicine, not just in the US. This is actually, some of the researchers started in Australia, but somebody came up with this idea of, well, from the time that somebody enters the emergency department to the time that they either get admitted or go home, it should always be 4 hours, because why should anyone have to wait? Think about what that means. I mean, how did emergency medicine evolve, right? It evolved from triage medicine. It evolved from how we actually engage in treating our wounded soldiers, on the field of battle, right? Intrinsic is this idea of waiting and how important it is, and how it is actually crucial to make sure that when you are treating people, you have to go to the most emergent case first and then work your way down, right? But somebody decided that, let's just superimpose the constraint of time as being the independent marker for how everything needs to get done. And while that seems like it might be a good idea, what it ends up just doing is that, and this may actually be something that Brad can speak to in terms of how we organize our time, is it just creates really dangerous situations. COVID-19 revealed just how dangerous that could be, right? Because if in theory you're supposed to be actually getting through all of these patients in this time constraint, well, I mean, there are certain laws of physics. I mean, you can only do a certain amount of things in a certain amount of time unless you add other resources to be able to rely on. And when the opposite is true, when we have less workforce, when we have more patients, when we actually don't have any standards to protect us, or those boundaries that Brad talked about, I think some of that might translate to some of the figures in mortality that we saw in the first wave of COVID-19, which when you compare it to the rest of the country, I mean, there's nothing really that compares, at least within the US. You have to sort of look outside within that small time window of 2 months between March and April. And I think a factor of that is this expectation that you need to be able to provide, miracle medicine with McDonald's approaches to like how we do things, right? It should be a driveway, but also we're saving lives. That's not actually how it should be, right? I should not be approaching medicine the same way as when I'm getting my Big Mac. I mean, this really should not be the same thing. And I think maybe some people will argue me against that, but that is really what I've been seeing. So my approach, what Imran is mentioning is because whereas in other sectors, you can have specific aspects of labor laws and organizing with unions, within physicians, we're traditionally in the US not allowed to do that. So our workaround has been creating these consortiums of physicians within our practices. For myself, one of them has been Emergency Medicine All Threats, which is a group of emergency physicians in New York that are advocating for those boundaries, but we talk about standards of care is what we use in medicine, so that we can have that. We need to have nursing ratios so that we can protect our nurses so they don't want to flee medicine because what we're asking them to do is inhumane and dangerous for patients, right? We should also actually have time constraints and support for childcare and all the other things that have been largely absent before the pandemic, and even now as I speak. Hold on, let me check my watch. Yes, it's still a problem. Still has not been fixed. Another aspect of what we do is I started an organization called Responder, which is networking our emergency physicians across the US and actually around the world to be able to do what we've been doing, all of us ad hoc, which is creating social networks where we can give and get guidance to each other. And that has been another powerful tool. Again, all of these workarounds that we do but in the reality in other sectors, as I see, you shouldn't be left to that. There should be other things that you are able to do to be able to set that within your workforce culture. So that's how we do it for us, but hopefully it's better for other people in other sectors.
Thank you, Sonya. Brad.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point concerning the how time is a particular resource, especially when it with regards to power. I think that was on Anna's question. It just reminds me of that terrible movie In Time with Justin Timberlake, where people. So I think it says a lot about how time relates to power, because I think the premise of the movie is that time is precious for one reason, and that reason is simply that I hate to say this, but we're all going to die. We have a finite lifespan, and that's what makes time so precious. You can always make theoretically more money. You can find more lithium batteries. You can find all kinds of things, but it's very hard to extend life significantly, and that's what makes it so precious. And in that movie, richer people have a kind of like all people have a clock in their forearm, and richer people have more time, so they can live much, much longer, and they accumulate that's vast amounts of lifetime, and the poorer people tend to they walk faster, they eat faster because they have less time. And I think that's really how it relates to power. A few years ago, I think it was 6 years ago, my girlfriend at the time offered me this coffee mug that I had to throw out because it made me so angry. It said, you have as many hours in a day as Beyonce. You know, everyone has 24 hours in a day. And I thought, well, no, Beyonce has she has nannies, she has chauffeurs, personal assistants, all kinds of people that literally create more time for her because she has more money, she has more fame, status, whatever, more privilege. And so in that sense, yes, time is we don't all have the same time. And someone recently told me, you know, about the minimum wage debate in the United States. You know, saying I make $7.33 an hour sounds a lot better than saying they pay me $7.33 for an hour of my life. And that's pretty much what it is. And I think that's what makes time such a different resource. It's an hour of our lifetime. So that's what I had to say.
Thanks, Brad. And I have Ryan and Sonya with their hands up. So Ryan, then Sonya.
I just wanted, I don't know how to lower my hand. Oh, there we go. I just want to put in the chat a paper by Roy Livna that kind of addresses this question about finitude and the medical drive to expand, to extend people's life at any cost. And he kind of looks at the idea that there are, across society, we're continuing to run up against limits and imposing limits on the how long we want to expand life, how long we want to continue economic growth at the cost of environmental degradation and climate change. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about this problem of how little time we have and how whether or not time is precious, because we all are going to die at some point sooner or later. So,
Sonya.
I was just thinking on that happy note. No, Brad, I'm going to look up this crucial Criterion Collection movie in time. I'm looking it up. But you brought up something excellent. I mean, first of all, when you bring up Beyonce in any conversation, it's usually the right decision. And but I think she might agree, as well as a lot of people, when we talked about the initial impact of COVID-19, while ultimately this has just shown like how hard hit the most vulnerable people ended up being. I mean, this is not an equitable pandemic at all, but at least initially it revealed to the people who have been most protected throughout, meaning our high income countries and people who are high earners within those high income countries. I think they got a small taste of what that's like, because one of the constraints we had in New York City and everywhere when we had lockdown measures also involved contact measures that, you know, in terms of who you can bring into your home, who could work where. And when childcare was taken away, I think that hit a lot of my fellow care providers for sure. And we realized just how crucial having resources like that are. So that when we're talking about this as a function of time, when we operationalize it, there are very practical, low-hanging fruit that we can pick that are just, once again, proving themselves again and again as being essential to be able to allowing our essential workforce to continue doing their job. But it's also probably essential for all of us to be able to have wellness within our workforce. So having those mechanisms of having resources for childcare, having protected time off, not just when you're sick, but just to be able to have that access of, like you're saying, the time to be able to care for your loved ones, have time for time off. You know, these are really important things that I hope, well, I don't know if we've learned them, that time will tell, but at least these are lessons identified, to be continued if they're learned. And yes, Beyonce should address this and make a song about it at some point.
Thanks, Sonya. So I'm going to go to the chat. S. Campbell, she has been very patiently waiting. She has made a few comments. So I'm just going to go to her first question, but I will note that she just responded. She just wrote, having children. So just kind of building on an earlier comment that was made, I think it was Brad's, having children also creates a time differential, not just in physical labor, but also emotional labor too. So that's something to note. And then the question she asked all the way at the beginning of the Q&A, and this was in response to something Ryan had said, but I think it would be applicable to all the panelists. She asked, I haven't heard much in my own research nor in the public domain regarding a comparison between the current COVID crisis and war. Most comparison in terms of temporal disruption and health certainty have been in terms of the Spanish flu of 1918. Any thoughts? Has she missed or have they missed a key discourse? Is that an apt comparison? And I see Brad's hand up, so please, you can go first, Brad.
That's a very interesting question, because I was reading a book that I was probably the only person reading it, maybe 15 other people, but that said it's how Australians coped with so how they dealt with time in the interwar period, so between the two world wars. And what the person found was that between or after any war, people feel obviously a lot of uncertainty. It's a huge crisis, and human beings at the individual and collective level, what do they do when there's a crisis? They usually adopt very ritualized or repetitive behaviors, and I think we've seen that during COVID. Everyone was telling us to adopt healthy routines, try to do the same thing every day, because that really creates a sense of familiarity, gives us a sense of control. We can control our routine. That's what people do when they're in a novel, critical situation. So I think in that sense, at least with regards to time, that's the parallel that I see.
Ryan.
So I think in our research, we heard a lot of people talking about war, actually. People who had lived through state collapse, or people who lived through wars, talked about it whenever we would ask about what the COVID pandemic reminded them of. And generally, when they talked about war, they were talking about the sudden collapse of and kind of sudden and all-encompassing collapse of social life as they had known it. So this was true of people who had immigrated to the US and experienced warfare elsewhere. It was true of older people who had fled Europe or had lived through the world wars in Europe and come to the US to live. And so warfare becomes a reference point for people who are experiencing the pandemic, or at least it did in the beginning. But I think that as the pandemic continues to go on, it also shares this characteristic of war that it lasts for, a long time.
Sonya.
Yes, I mean, I think I referenced earlier sort of the evolution of my specialty technically comes from battlefield medicine, although I have typically refrained from making that analogy just because I feel pretty strongly that if people are drawing those comparisons, I prefer sort of out of respect to our people who work in military, I say that allow them to draw those analogies because they know better than most. Although, yes, anyone who's experienced any type of collapse of civil society will say, yes, we see that there are similarities. It's crisis, right? So the definition of my field is being able to understand how you allocate scarce resources within medicine all the time. That's what we do, right? It is interesting to see this now extend to all aspects of healthcare and all social support structures, and indeed all levels of civil society. And yes, the factor of protracted crisis is not something that human beings are typically built to deal with, or at least not in a way where we adapt is what we're hoping for. And sometimes those adaptations are not necessarily always for the better, but it's about survival. At some point, I think trying to shift, and somebody brought this up, one of my fellow panelists, about who decides when this ends. And I don't think anybody makes that decision, but one day we'll be transitioning from survival to just living, and that'll happen individually for everybody at a different time. Some people, I think, when they're experiencing this protracted trauma, they'll experience it long after there are no more illnesses that we're seeing at the level that we're seeing. And so that's one thing to think about. We could go back to Beyonce though, because that's a little bit more of a happier topic.
Oh, well, I will I will take a question from David Schwartz, and this one kind of relates to what you're saying, but I think is very much about the experience of time. So he prefaces this by saying, a complicated question or comment. One, E. Sokolov, a Soviet physiologist, posited an orienting response, a sort of eureka moment. These have or impose a subjective cast upon the experience of time. For example, a shrink, a psychologist dealing with a patient in pain who does not know what is causing the patient's pain will, upon recognizing a correct diagnosis, experience a eureka-like moment which will affect his or her own experience of time passing. They will experience a reduction in their empathic pain derived from the patient. Do you see what I mean? Like adopting a new, better paradigm will positively influence the experience of time passing, perhaps also to the extent to which physical aging occurs. Given the medical reference, there may be, Sonya, you may try that first if you would like.
I would say if we have any physicists anywhere, that's the person who is best equipped to answer this question. So first of all, by the way, I love this, and I will probably be looking this up because I think it's beautiful. It's also disturbing sometimes when we have that personal eureka moment, but then sometimes we're wrong, or that sometimes the patient doesn't share that eureka moment with us when it's, you know, something that nobody wants to hear when it's a diagnosis of something bad. But in any case, what I would say to that is that, I mean, truly, when it comes to how we're all experiencing this, I mean, it is absolutely, I mean, again, get the physicist on board. Time is relative. Like how we're all experiencing this is going to be unique to the context of what we have included, like what we have perceived in our experience in this. And so the medicalization of it is just a small part of it. I think that everybody has a valid touchstone to this comment of just how true that is to all of us. How it actually translates to the workplaces is how can you get those moments to happen more, right? What are the ways in which you can create more space where that's happening for people more frequently, you know? I think that is the key to how we're all trying to figure out how to get people back. And, you know, this is just one small part of it, but yeah, I would love to see that more in my life. That'd be great.
Ryan or Brad, any comments on that?
I think that speaks a little bit to, you know, the idea of the eureka moment gets to the idea of how much we seek a sort of epistemological security when there's a crisis like this. The idea that we want to know what's going on and the idea that we can make sense of it. And that does seem to make time go more quickly for people. It allows them to feel like they're part of a community because everyone is experiencing this thing that we're going through together. That can be fragmented, right? I mean, into sub-communities, like, you know, people who are convinced that the pandemic is a hoax feel like they have had a eureka moment and they realize exactly what's going on as well. So this is a way in which the COVID crisis becomes a divisive crisis or a contentious crisis as opposed to a consensus crisis that draws everyone together. But I think that there is this idea that particularly in a moment that is unlike anything that most of us have ever experienced before, people search for a sort of certainty and a sort of security in their knowledge to know what's happening, what kind of event they're living through.
Thanks, Ryan. Brad, any comment?
Yeah, I was rereading the novel Robinson Crusoe the other day, and I just find it fascinating that one of the first things that he did when he got shipwrecked on that island was not necessarily what we would all do, you know, like just to look for, I don't know, food or that kind of thing. He actually took this large wooden post, turned it into a cross, and he etched, you know, he cut a few notches for each day of the week, each week of the month, each month of the year. He turned it into a calendar just to keep track of time, because that's like Ryan said, there was a huge element of uncertainty, especially when you're in a novel situation like being stranded on an island. You want to keep track of time because otherwise you're going to go insane. That's what I was also reading. I don't know why I keep reading these things, but like the manual for how to survive solitary confinement. I was reading that book for some reason, but the one of the inmates, because it was written by inmates, one of the inmates said that when you're in solitary confinement, you don't see you completely lose your sense of time. That's why it's important to really listen a lot for like maybe cars or anything that would indicate what time of day it is, just to keep that sense of time, keep track of time. Speaking of inmates, we've all seen, the TV trope where people cut or etch little grooves on their on the wall of their cell just to keep track of the days or the weeks, because that really helps people create a sense of at least direction. Time is almost like a dimension or a map. We think of time as space usually, and so we need a map to kind of like feel, I guess, comfortable or have a sense of certainty. Having a schedule or having anything that helps us keep track of time is, in a certain sense, a sense-making device.
Thanks, Brad. So I've been reminded that we're nearing the end. We have about 15 minutes left, and we're having in the chat a great discussion about creating a dystopian summer reading list from all of these great reading suggestions that have been made. So I would say at this point, if you have other questions to pose, please do. Otherwise, I have some that I would like to ask, but I also wanted to give the opportunity to Gerhard, who is one of the organizers. Gerhard, would you, and you don't have to, if you have any question or comment to make, think about it. And before that, Sonya has raised her hand, so we'll go to Sonya, then we'll go to Gerhard, then we'll go to Isabel. So please go ahead, Sonya.
Thanks, Imran. And I'm going to look up that reading list as soon as I get a chance. But I was thinking of something that was mentioned by Ryan about epistemologics, and also sort of tethered to what Brad is mentioning, in that, I mean, it is, in a sense, there's this way in which we're approaching time as this structure upon us, but our brains also. So if we're adding to that dystopian reading list, I'm sure everyone here has read this, but Thinking Fast and Slow. I think Daniel Kahneman and then Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, how the brain is actually structured to do this, right? I mean, again, it is heuristics that we use in medicine, the term, right? To help us work faster through a problem, right? It helps us organize our brain. It helps us understand when we need to see alarm bells in one area and we can shut them down in another. And I think it's both. You're experiencing in that sort of abstract sense time, but in a very concrete, literal sense, you're experiencing the mental load, the strain of what your brain needs to do to work a problem to make sure that you are secure and safe, right? And so again, I always bring it back to the operational aspects. It's like whatever you can do to decrease that mental load, to actually build in structures that take it away from this abstraction, take it away from the idea of what you're putting on your brain to do in that sort of background, is helpful. And as I said, practical things that can be done, right? So when I work a problem, we have heuristics in medicine, but then the other aspects of things that can buy us time, like already mentioned in terms of the time management aspects of what we can do in the workplace. All critical things to allow us, and maybe that's where that eureka moment comes from, is when we decrease the burden of all those extrinsic sort of mental health work that you have to do to get to the solution is what we're all trying to go for. And yeah, that's about that. The other thing I was going to mention in terms of the solitary confinement, Brad, is there's actually this distortion you can get. It's the thalamus in the brain, if it's impacted. You can't perceive time. It's a very interesting phenomenon that can happen. It's very, very rare, but in some limited capacity, and one specific example of a patient who experienced this, they described this patient as being able to just be an extreme marathon runner, because one of the things that she experienced that she couldn't experience time. So she had no idea what those limits were until she was going into actually such bad strain that she was having muscle breakdown and kidney damage. So it was just an interesting way of like, there is some actual biological aspect of this part of time that is very much a part of how we survive, which hopefully we're not all getting to the point where we're having muscle breakdown and collapsing. So whatever we can do to support ourselves from going down that route is important.
Super. Thanks, Sonya. Gerhard.
Yeah, thanks, Imran. I think my question is sort of directed to Brad and his book project about against time management, and it sort of it's always intrigued. In your thesis, I remember you had this distinction between pre-modern time, time belonged to God, modern time belongs to your boss, right, in the capitalist system. And in a sense, like how we have to manage our time, right? The system makes us do it. Otherwise, we have these burnouts that Sonya was referring to. Otherwise, we have all sorts of issues. Marathon running, maybe one of them. But, we have to manage time. But doing that, we reproduce the system, right? And this is maybe the question that Daniel Kinderman asks as well, in a sense. It's like, there's also somebody in the chat said, it's people after lockdown, people who protest are those who can afford, who have the time to protest, right? It's not those who actually should protest. So, tell us, or I mean, any of the panelists, what should we do?
Vote for better people, because I mean, it often is a problem of a social policy, because a lot of people think, again, because of the kind of society where we live, we often frame it as an individual decision. We have to manage our time, that almost by definition presupposes that we are the only ones responsible for managing our time. And if we frame it differently, it's often seen as a bit more authoritarian. But the reality is that even though people didn't have as much control on their schedule back in the 1940s and 50s, a lot of people didn't feel the time pressure that we do today, even though objectively they had less free time and leisure time. So it's a paradox. Today we have more free time and leisure time, and yet we are more likely to complain about not having time compared to people in the 1960s. There's tons of time use studies that have been tracking Americans and Canadians over the past 60 years, and it's been a consistent finding, the time pressure paradox. And the reason is simply that when you feel that you have to manage your own time, that adds an extra mental load where you're always wondering if whatever you're doing now is the best use of your time. That's also why people that are in positions where you have a secretary or a personal assistant are not as pressed for time. It's simply because they know that whatever they're doing at this time, this has been figured out by someone else. And so they know that whatever, if they're talking to you, or if they're, I don't know, at a networking event, they know that this is the absolute best possible use of their time, because they have a team of people who figured that out for them. Whereas for, I guess, many of us, we have to constantly be, juggling between emails and meetings, and always feeling unproductive because we feel that we could have been doing something else or something more productive. And there's always this kind of opportunity cost that's nagging us in the back of our minds. What can we do? I can't say that this can be solved with better time management, because the reality is that we are all much better at time management than our parents and grandparents were. And paradoxically, it's because we are getting better at time management that things are getting worse. Because as you get better, you become more productive, and the productivity standards are becoming higher and higher. We've seen this in academia. Now, back in the 70s, you didn't even need a PhD to get a job. Whereas now you need a PhD, multiple publications. And so these standards keep getting higher and higher, which means that you have to be more and more productive. And by being more and more productive, the next generation of people are going to have to work even harder. So it's, I guess, self-defeating.
I will give the last question to Isabel, but did Ryan or Sonya have any reaction to Gerhard's comment before we move on to Isabel, who gets the last question?
No, only that I'm really looking.
Brad, you spoke for me. Yeah. Go ahead.
As well.
I'm sorry, was there a question? I didn't.
No, I just said that I didn't have any reaction, except that I'm really looking forward to your book about being against time management. So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
So Isabel, you will get the last question, please.
Well, it was probably not so much to ask a question than to respond to Daniel Kinderman's question in the Q&A, because I think one of the very interesting initiative currently taken with regard to our politics of time, it has been in Europe, actually the European Parliament, which in last January, recognized that given the ability for workers to be basically surveyed, monitored from any place and at any time, and given the compounded effect of the pandemic, the European Parliament has actually made a statement about the need for an EU directive to be negotiated covering the right to disconnect. So the right for workers to disconnect, meaning that indeed it should be regulated when people are available for their employer or not. And this is obviously an old issue in labor rights, but that has to be upgraded, I would say, given the current technological conditions. So this, I think, is interesting because it reveals that we can make the issue of time a public cause. To speak as John Dewey, we could aim for that. It's been a central issue in the past in terms of reducing, the working time to enable the working class to lead a decent life. And obviously, the coordinates are very different today, as you have very well explained. But this is again an issue that should be put back at the core of the political agenda, and it's really about worker power and the role that you have highlighting the importance of this public cause. I think is very crucial. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Isabel, for that. And I feel, just with respect to the point you've made, there are also, I think, national and international policies, but also sector level policies. So Sonya, maybe you can speak to this. There was something of an uproar in American medicine a few years ago when I think it was the American Medical Association recommended that residents who are physicians in training work no more than 80 hours a week. That was deemed to be enough because people were working in emergency medicine and surgery. They were working some weeks over 100 hours. Is that correct, Sonya? Is that?
So you are correct that yes, within healthcare there was pushback and there's been some progress. There's still so much more to make, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, that similar to what Brad is saying, vote better, but advocate better. I mean, I think we should probably realize that this is a very specialized niche group that we're talking to, where the majority of the world still does not have access to the ability, the channels to be able to advocate for yourself, to find groups to do advocacy for you, to vote. Most of the places I previously worked up until COVID, I mean, that's just not an avenue for people. So I guess if we're talking about structures of power, especially, I'm not an economist, but I'm pretty sure that with labor shortages in the US, I mean, this is the time to actually start engaging in that work as best as that you can, right? In terms of equity, it's the time to fight for it. And it does have real world action when you do. And yes, I do understand that there are some people who, have more time to protest, but there are other people who don't even have that as a power, right? So don't ever forget that.
Ryan and Brad, if you had any last words in the closing couple of minutes. No pressure.
Yeah, just be very mindful of your own time. It's okay. It's okay to say no. It's okay to, I guess, disappoint other people. This is something that I've learned through graduate education. I remember there was a very famous and a senior scholar that came to our university to give a talk about time, and I raised my hand at the end and just asked her if she knew about some other studies that I knew about, and she found them very interesting. So she asked me to send her an email with all the references, which I did the very next Monday, because I have the very bad habit of checking my email only at certain times and certain days. But at the time, just shows you how not socially well adjusted I am, my email signature said, please note that I check my email only on weekdays and at these times. And so she replied that, she really appreciated the references and everything, and that she would be open to collaborate with me. And in closing, she said, what's with the email signature? I understand the need for work-life balance and everything, but if I'm going to collaborate with the doctoral student, I really expect a lot of responsiveness. And I don't know why she used a different font for the word responsiveness. It's, just to highlight anyway. And I was mad and I felt bad. My mom's Catholic, so I feel I'm very guilt prone. And this entire time I felt so guilty that I missed the one important thing in this entire incident, which was that her reply came in 9 days after I sent her my email. So I was like, you're in no position to tell me anything about responsiveness. So anyway, all that to say that don't listen to people's bullshit, just to manage your time and try to discount other people's opinions as much as you can. In fact, one of the chapters is called Time Management Hell is Other People, which essentially means that, if you listen to other people, time management is going to be hell for you. So try to do your thing as much as you can.
Final word to Ryan.
Just to think about protecting your own time and the time that you spend with people and things that are important to you in ways that maybe became more possible under the pandemic, and that as we move back into I guess you could call it an interpandemic period as opposed to a post-pandemic period, to not allow yourself and others around you to resume this sort of hectic pre-pandemic pace of always racing for productivity and racing to get more and more done. I think there's a possibility that we actually do end up with a better sense of balance between work and life, so to speak. But so thanks to the whole panel, and thank you, Imran, for moderating so joyously and wonderfully here.
Oh, and thank you. And thank you really again, Ryan, Sonya, Brad, and everyone who's here. And thank you for your time, for spending your Friday afternoon or evening if you're in Europe. We really appreciate it. And again, just to remind you to look in the chat. There are some really interesting ideas and suggestions that have been made. You might save it if you wish. And we hope next year to be in person with you all in Amsterdam. So this is technically the third year in a row that SASE is going to be in Amsterdam, except that we've been virtually in Amsterdam in 2020 and 2021. So hope to see you there. And again, thank you so much to everyone who participated, and in particular to Brad, Ryan, and Sonya. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoy your weekend, everyone, and enjoy the holiday weekend for those of you who are in the United States.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Have a good one.
you,
Have a good
Imran.
Thanks,
weekend.
Imran.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you.